All right, howdy everyone. Just a few people are coming in. Hope you're all having a good day wherever you are.
Hello.
Yeah, got almost getting up to the number that were registered, so looking quite good in terms of all that. Um, I'm Mirren, by the way, and I'm sitting in New Zealand this morning, so feel free to type in the chat where in the world you're sitting in and what time it is. It's 7 a.m. where I am. And the fun with this, we never know where people are going to pop up from and who you might meet. Seems as though the folks that are coming in, we've all um, pretty slowed down on the emitting, so I think I'll get started now. And great to see we've got a wonderful spread of time zones today as well. Excellent. So, well, welcome along to this little introduction to understanding the impacts of climate change. We're going to, everyone can hear me fine and you can see my screen fine. I forgot to check that. Just a thumbs up or a head shake. Um, Looking good. Excellent. Right. Uh, so we're going to embark on a little journey today of exploring the often unseen world of supply chains and the surprising impact that they actually do have on the environment or the planet, I suppose. We'll look at some of those hidden costs of convenience and uncovering some significant contribution that these intricate networks play in the role of climate change. And by the end of the presentation, I hope you'll understand some of the challenges and will have discovered ways to work towards a more sustainable future together. On the call today, I've got Shark. She's in there as Community. If you have any other questions or that or tech challenges, just quickly message her, but she'll be following the chat while I'm presenting, and I'll leave a few minutes at the end to actually give us some questions. So you should be all seeing the agenda now, and we can see that we're going to run through these, that power of supply change, the impact that they have. Talk a bit about the bullwhip effect or the impact of over ordering and or varying your orders, and then get into the four phases of how you can look at kind of production or supply chain through those next four bullet points, and then what does it mean to be leading the change. Right, my good old mouse has moved off on me, so let me get back to the right screen here. Sorry, right, active to move on. So when we're thinking about supply chains, why not think about something as simple as your morning coffee? I'm guessing many of you may have considered this a bit, but as an intro for some, the beans might come from Brazil and South America. You've got roasting then might be happening in Italy. It's packed in Germany. It's shipped to your local store, wherever that is, and with some brands that can be anywhere in the world. And then each step of this journey is a complex uh, supply chain of transportation and logistics going on. So that understand that full product's life history and where it's come from and the environmental impact it has, and also don't forget the social impact that that all has, how it really impacts on our lives. So supply chains really plays a crucial role. But each component extends far beyond our immediate needs of just the coffee and has these large impacts that sometimes we totally forget about. There can be a component of the supply chain that you just forget how much energy is used in it or how much time's needed of people and that, or hidden resources. So we're going to emphasize that global nature of most supply chains. I don't think many products in the world these days, and by products, anything that's manufactured, has probably got components components from different parts of the world. You could argue for food that a lot of these uh, can be sourced locally or more locally, but still it's worthwhile looking to how they goods are moved around from that raw material stage to the production and then finally the consumption. And don't forget that disposal at the end. So supply chains move goods basically from raw materials consumers. And they, as we all know, it's essential for our modern economy and our daily lives, things we get. And there's these very complex networks that involve stages within each have these social and environmental impacts. And when we start getting into this a little bit more, and some of the details are amazing, the impacts of how things go. So they contribute, of course, these supply chain, the vehicles move around, the energy be used, and that is creates greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see that these emissions will have come from transportation, ships, trucking, planes, even couriers. And don't forget that last little mile these days with lots of little couriers going around, lower impact bikes sometimes, but sometimes those can be still quite large vehicles delivering small packages. There's that energy use that's being used in the factory or the mines and on the paddocks, fields of farmers and that, and then the other facilities along the way. If you're in cold storage, you've got that refrigeration being in the factories and then on the truck and transportation side and then in the supermarkets. And of course, don't forget land use changes. You've got that, we're loading a lot of product, then obviously we sometimes are having to change forests into grass or wheat or corn, and also the mining extraction. These have a substantial impact that often exceed the direct emissions. All of these operations have emissions that are a lot larger than obviously sometimes just the head office. So many companies, you might understand that we have scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emissions. So often that scope 3 supply chain is a lot larger for companies. But of course, we have the convenience of having goods readily available, and that's that hidden cost behind it we're going to explore. And supply chains are estimated to account for up to about 80% of a product's total carbon footprint. That's going to vary between different ones, but just go with the 80-20 rule if you're trying to think about this for most products. It's a lot of time, a significant part of it. And that, as mentioned, the transportation, manufacturing, and energy consumption involved are the major contributors. You've got that agriculture, deforestation, and resource extraction can play a very significant role in some products. So this number, 11.4 times higher that we've got on the diagram, that's about what supply chains contribute in global greenhouse gas emissions. That number's pretty significant when you think about things going on. And so the key point that we want to work through in this course that we're running after this introduction is that you'll get to understand what we call these hotspots and where that a product you're interested in is, that you might be able to then discover some of these hidden emissions that you can then work with companies to help reduce their use of fossil fuels and try and change some of their production to maybe more greener energy sources. And also, you can also look at the ways things are being distributed and moved around and hopefully lower your impact from that. Right. So, what we're going to talk about here is, imagine you've got yourself, you're a retailer somewhere and you've got a product and you're thinking, hey, this is selling very well at the moment. And I'm going to reach out to my supplier who sends it to me and say to them, well, I think I'm going to have to need X more product next 6 months or whatever your ordering timeline is. That will allow them to start producing it, and they can reach out to their suppliers, and then we all kind of get the product back. But what we're talking about with a bullwhip effect, this is like taking a whip or a ribbon and you wiggle a little bit and there's a bigger impact. That's what we're meaning by the red line in this. So a small change in your choice of how you order can have quite a big impact further down the supply chain, or up the supply chain, I should say, in this case. So imagine you've got, say, 100 products that you think you're going to be able to sell, and you reach out to your supplier and say, hey, can you supply me with another 100? They'll probably go, well, we've got to put a factor in for maybe there's some might get damaged, some might have some an issue, so there'll be a couple of percent that they might add on to that number for that. But then they also think, well, actually, last time those folks ordered, the last minute they asked if we could get 120 rather than 110. So I'm going to go on the assumption that the market's going well, so I'm going to go and order the required materials to make 120, even though the order's only for 110. So there's like a 20% increase, and that doesn't sound too much, but imagine if you were talking about a 5 or 6% change on 100,000 items, because they wouldn't change that much. What we're saying is when that person then reaches out, each of the suppliers of the components reaches out to their suppliers up the supply chain, there'll be another added on impact of they're going, well, we've got to extract this amount of material. Of course, we might have some issue with our raw material if we're making say we're just making a simple hair dryer. Then you're going to get someone saying, I'm going to supply enough of these components to make up the motors and the plastic handles and that to be well over the 120 that the manufacturer has asked for. So that's what we're meaning by the bullwhip. A small change in the order from the retailer can have quite an impact up the supply chain, and you can end up with a significant amount of material being used to make a product, say the hairdryer, that turns up and then the order still stays at 100. What's going to happen to that extra percentage, that extra 10 or 20 items? They're going to sit around, and it's overuse of materials for manufacturing that. Hopefully they can find someone else to supply it to, but often that will end up become products. And as you may know, especially in the clothing industry and sometimes in the food industry, items that are surplus at the manufacturers often get marked or damaged or disposed of and can't be used. So it's that impact on the environment of all this overproduction for that extra uncertainty that we're talking about here. So the bullwhip effect is keeping in mind being as accurate when you're ordering, when you're requesting things, and trying not varying it too much so that the supply chain doesn't also add on their safety margins. And that hopefully can make quite a significant change. That could be the simplest thing you can do in your organization. So don't underestimate that part. The next thing we're going to talk about is what I was mentioning before, is about carbon hot or emissions hotspots. And so it really becomes down to looking at each product you deal with, and it can be a service, because if you're still thinking of a service such as cloud computing resources, how much you're storing online and things. So there's multiple ways to look at this, but we'll keep mainly to a product in our discussion. So we're looking for where those emissions are in the supply chain. And so if we quickly think about all the components, I think there's multiple areas you could look at and break the supply chain down into. But what we like to think of as 4 simple areas to consider. And this is these 4 that I mentioned. We're going to talk through each one. You've got the process of getting the raw materials, the extraction, and sometimes the processing of that to get it ready to go to the manufacturing. And not only during the manufacturing, what energy does that manufacturing plant need, and the way that they're actually producing those goods. Then you've got your transportation, getting it from factory to warehouse to shop, and then on to consumer in some stages. And then the last is the end of life. Uh, what happens to that? How is it changed? So not all the parts of your supply chain are going to be having the same impact, and different locations or technology being used and is going to create possibly higher or lower emissions. So it's looking through that to identify those hotspots is crucial for focusing your mitigation efforts and driving your targeted solutions. As a couple of quick examples, if we go back to, say, the fashion side, you've got that textile production, all the taking the fibers, weaving it, dyeing it. Then your transportation are the significant footprint parts. In electronics, it's often, and particularly with smarter devices, or we've got the metals, and some of those, what are classified as rare earth metals, are often require a lot of raw material to be moved in the mines, but to get a small amount of product at the end. And then in the electronics, so you've got that mining part. Manufacturing can be very extensive, and the end of life then becomes a challenge with some of that waste disposal. And there is the product being able to be pulled apart, so it then becomes part of discussing, or repaired, I should say, before being pulled apart. So you're looking at how can we help recover those materials at the end, and get it back into repurposed, recycled, recovered, those materials for another life, rather than going into landfill, or worse, just being the valuable resources that go into landfill is amazing in the past. We're getting better at that. So it's how do you help the recyclers along that supply chain, and their chance of bringing materials back to central processing facilities is often the challenge if you're looking at the end of life disposal for anything. In the agricultural sector, you've got those intensive farming practices of, big machinery, lots of spraying, often, and so there's equipment going in, ploughing fields and all that. But don't forget, of course, that deforestation that might be happening to create more space to produce that product. And the problem with doing some food production is a lot of food waste creates the major emissions from things like the methane that food just dumped in a landfill emits. And I'm sure you've heard the stat that about a third of all the food in the that is produced is wasted somewhere along the supply chain. So those are the different areas that we kind of focus in on, and now we're going to break each of those down a little bit further and give a few more examples there. And so the process of extraction and processing is that raw material, and say if you're using aluminium in a phone, or probably aluminium is not being used in a phone these days, like keyboard or that, but aluminium, you've got a lot of mining happening. You've got a process with a lot of energy to convert that raw bauxite into the aluminium, and that's very energy intensive. So you can see that in the metal industry, it accounts for about 7% of the global greenhouse emissions, and with steel production making up 1/3 of that. That's just steel, not aluminium. So recovering of aluminium is really important, because the recovery part of aluminium is that it can be recycled basically infinitely. It doesn't deteriorate. When you recycle paper, the fibers break down into smaller parts and you can't make as high a quality product. So that's why all that energy that goes into producing aluminium, it's way less when you only have to reheat the aluminium, melt it down, and reuse it again. And so, what we're talking about there for smelting purposes for aluminium, it produces about 12 tons of CO2 equivalent per ton of aluminium produced, but it drops down to way below that when you recover it. Of course, most of the intensity is in that mining. The 3.5% of global greenhouse gas figure that's sitting there, we're talking about there is the plastics life cycle, from the extraction and the processing to use and disposal. That's what they're saying is, so you're taking that oil out of the ground, you're manufacturing, transporting it around, you're producing, say, a bottle, and then recovering it back. All of that can be about 3.5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. You can see quite quickly that we're talking reasonably significant numbers. And so the other stat from doing the plastic is that producing a ton of virgin plastic, so taking the oil, processing it, and getting it through that pellet stage to the stage is basically 3.2 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per ton of virgin plastic. So yeah, the whole metal production generally has higher greenhouse emissions per unit of material than plastic production, but the total... Oh, I've just noticed that you're not hearing me too well. Is that for everyone, or is that just for one person? Sorry, just noticed that question.
Oh, it's pretty good.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, where was I at? So that whole metal production generally has higher greenhouse gas emissions than plastic per volume, but there's a lot more plastic produced than there is steel, so or metal. So keep in mind when you're looking at these stats, don't always look at the per unit of for how high the production emissions are. Look at how much of it is you're using and put it together. Right, and of course this is where we get into the last bullet point that I haven't talked about, is that sustainable sourcing practices. And so what is the places that you can get? How can we maybe make the plastic from a lower impact farmed raw source, such as you can make pretty much plastic from many different raw sources and it becomes the same. So what plant can we grow that's not a food crop and turn it in there? Because you've got this whole challenge where we've had food sources being used for production of non-food products. And one of those examples has been in the petrol, diesel, gasoline space, and where they've taken oil from crops such as corn and that means that corn is not being used to produce food. So watch the switching that happens in this stage. It mightn't be the best choice when you look at the overall impact on people and the environment. Cool, into the manufacturing and energy use area. We started talking about the different significant processes for the energy, and in energy we're meaning whether that is coming from gas, coal, oil, hydro, wind, solar, and that's a big issue is where we don't use our waste energy. When I say waste energy, I mean energy that is coming off, say if we've heated something up and then there's hot water produced, then people might be able to use that hot water for another process, and it might be in the neighboring factory. So that rather than just leaving that hot water to cool down or be put into the river or the stream, how do we take that energy that we're put into it and give it a second use? But of course, at the moment, fossil fuels are the main source of energy, and we're wanting to try and find more ways to get renewable energy into these productions. And then the production that technology or the way we do things can be changed and often save a lot of energy use. So it's not only the raw source, but the efficiency and adopting other ways of doing things to reduce the energy you need, no matter what source it comes from. And as you can read there, electricity and heat production accounts for 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. Now that's across everything, not just manufacturing, I believe that figure is. We should actually check that one, Shark. Right, on to the next stage, transportation. There can be significant emissions generated from this. Now you think of, say if I wanted my favorite coffee to get to me quickly from the roaster in Italy and I'm in the US, the difference between air freight and sea road freight is a major difference. And so timing to allow the logistics supply chain folks to be able to use the more less energy intensive, more efficient from a greenhouse gas emission perspective really makes a difference. I was surprised one stage there was some flight cancelled out of Europe, and I was living in Hong Kong at that stage, and at the local cafe they said we didn't have the vegetarian sausages because they haven't been flown in, and I'm thinking, vegetarian sausages are pretty shelf stable. They should be something that should be being shipped most of the time. Why were they being flown? It was really an interesting one to think of what products were being flown that didn't really need to. So optimizing that options, and that's talking about what timing you need, how you can work in with other companies if you've got smaller volumes to bring things across together so you can save some price reduction in your transportation costs. But often it's shifting the mode from the higher contributions to lower contributions. Now, of course, these days we've got the difference between what vehicle is being used. Now, if we're just looking at trucks, trucks that are newer are of course going to use less fuel, and the other thing is if we're going from a diesel to an electric powered truck, anywhere along there you're going to reduce your emissions. So it's not just the type of transport, it's what is the method that that transport uses to move along. Right, and then last of all, don't forget about the recovery stage. Waste that's generated is certainly a major environmental challenge, as we know. It's one of those things that it's either being seen out in nature or it's impacting nature and our local environment and people's health. So back to the bullwhip effect. Don't forget, unsold products, what happens to them, all the packaging that goes around them. And now there's lots of hidden packaging often. So you've got packaging that gets the material from the factory, the raw material factory to the production site, and then just the way things are boxed up and bagged up in, and all the pellet wrap, the shrink wrap that goes around things, all of that adds to your product that you see on the shelves waste footprint. And then afterwards, how easy is it to get it back to a recycler or reuse? And these emissions from the wastes that if it's just put in a landfill, the methane emissions it is estimated that about 5 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions actually come from methane, and often that's out of just landfills. Now, of course, in landfills, we might be forgetting that that we live in an area where there's managed good landfills, and they might have gas recovery facilities and that. But remember, most of the world has pretty much a hole in the ground or on the side of a bank where waste is thrown. So a lot of those emissions are coming from poorly managed waste. So the design of your product, especially if it's going into areas that don't have good municipal solid waste collection and management, is where that emissions factor really goes up or amount. And of course, we've got at the end of the factory life, there's the demolition of, say, the construction material. You've got cleaning chemicals and solvents and all of that that's being used along the way, or disposal. So keeping the process that you use to clean products when you're manufacturing them, or when it's being operated or used at the final consumer, what do they have to do? All of this comes into the things to think about that product's impact and what's happening along your full supply chain. Of course, we talked about landfills. Incineration is slightly better because you can at least generate some heat or other material from it, but it's still going to generate pollutants such as toxic chemicals coming out of the incineration process that needs to be captured from the chimneys and then put into landfill. And these are still things that if we design better and we don't shift as much around, that's less to have to handle and put in a landfill anyhow. And trying to make sure that all of these things are coming together, because the thing, seeing the comment there, it's crazy how much waste there is from not just fast fashion, but others, is that the World Bank estimates that global waste generation will reach 3.4 billion tons by 2050. And I'm left just going, what? What's a billion tons? That is just huge when we think about it. And that's all resources that, if we design differently, a large percentage of that is probably recoverable materials that we aren't pulling back out. So looking at the disposal along options and how you can work with other companies to help with the recovery. Of course, a lot of products get distributed into a wide number of places at the end. It's not centralized. Getting them back is the biggest challenge for recovery. So anything you do in your community and your business logistics to help what they call reverse logistics, bringing stuff back, is going to make a big difference as well. All right, how are we going? 30 minutes in, and summarizing up all of this in this slide is that depending on how you took all those numbers I gave there, that you can see here that not all parts of the supply chain are created equal. And of course, these numbers are averages for everything. You start getting into specific products, they're going to change. So you are looking at, in general, you've got these numbers across the bottom of like 3 to 7% in material extraction of global greenhouse gases of the supply chain, is then manufacturing at 25% of that, transportation about 17%, and then waste disposal 5 to 10. So for your product, you really need to go in and see what is the hot spot. Is it at the start? Is it in the middle? Or is it at the end? And then you can focus your efforts into what can we mitigate here and what's changed. The textile industry we mentioned before a little bit, but it's that production, the amount of water required for some cottons, the dyeing process, and transportation are often a significant one there. We talked just briefly again of the electronics and metals is really often the earlier part of the supply chain, but some of the end waste disposal can actually create major problems. I see a quick question there. Those waste and disposal percentages are really surprising. That's across the supply chain's contribution of greenhouse gas, if that's right. So that's not for everything, all greenhouse emissions. So yeah, that right. I've talked about hotspots, your attention to what you need to focus on, whatever you do, and working across what is the new alternatives or new processes in each one of those phases. As I said, those four are just an easy way that we use to keep together. You'll see some models or processes that'll break it down to like 15 different things or 30 different things, and it just gets more and more complicated. And the thing is, as a boffin or an expert in this area, you don't want to lose your audience you're talking to. So just keep it simple things. It's dig, make, transport, and use, and disposal. Right. So getting back into
this area. Sorry, one question.
Yep.
So those numbers you had there before, are those the numbers contributions to the supply chain greenhouse gas emissions?
Yes, supply chains part, and then I'd have to.
So what would the other part be? Because obviously those numbers didn't add up to 100%. Where would the other contributions be coming from?
Oh, I see what you're saying. 2 seconds. So what we're talking about here, you've got other things in your. So this is the transportation sector will have other things like office use. You've got the design processes and all these things. We're not doing the whole manufacturing process here for the product. This is the supply chain. So you've got all those other things. So your marketing, which in some places, in some things they've got. What do you call it? When you're doing displays and all of that type in-store displays. So it's only the supply chain component of the business we're looking at here. So if you're looking at about the whole product, and then remember these are greenhouse gas emissions based on the I know you were asking that question. Sorry, the right way is like, yeah, why does this not add up to 100? Where's the rest of it? Is that you've got other components for your products that are not in. Making sense? Or have I confused everyone? Because there's other components of your product production, and when we're saying supply chain, then these are the kind of the direct parts, I suppose, that you're focusing on, the product production. Okay, I see a couple of comments there. And thanks, Shark, for typing in some other comments in there. So I'll move on. Yeah. So what we're looking at is the steps. Where are your emission hotspots? What can you do to address those highest impacts? And the other part is often who do you have to collaborate with? So the part in that collaboration is when you think about your materials you're using, you're not going to possibly be that big of a purchaser. Say if you're a major producer of an item, then yes, you've got the buying power to be able to change or request your suppliers to make a change. Often though, you might, even as a large supplier, be lucky if you're 50% of some suppliers' contracts. So it's worthwhile looking at your industry partners and outside your industry that uses the same materials to work with them so that you can request some changes, and the upstream manufacturers are able to see that there's enough volume of interest in that new material, and that way you can work together to say, yes, we'd like you to switch from one way of making it or one type of thing to another, and you can help shift the market that way. So that whole thing of more you can collaborate with, other businesses get more comfortable with the change that is being requested, and then they can see that it's worthwhile them investing their time and money in new product and new plant to make that for you. Oh, sorry, right back. So when we're looking at this last part of leading the change and how we actually can make a difference, business certainly does have a critical role to play in this, because we're the ones that basically design and produce products. So you can invest in renewable energy on site if you have your own factories, but often you're going to have to work with others for the bulk of your hotspot in your supply chain. And that's going to be helping them, as I say, talk about what's the volume of materials that people will buy from them to make them comfortable changing their plant over, to getting rid of that older equipment earlier that mightn't have been ready to be written off the books. Climate impact supply chain is very complex, but if you keep looking at different components, you will be able to get over it and make some forward progress. Taking action is always better, and by taking action, just that can be just having the conversation with your suppliers. Looking at what the options are for those sustainable materials and adopting the circular economy principles. And so that circular economy principle that often is forgotten is about, while I make a product that is repairable, recyclable, does it make it to the right places that can repair it or can recycle it? Because often many people in probably most countries, if they're outside a city, then they don't often have the volume of material that makes it worthwhile for the recyclers to bring things, for the recyclers to collect or someone to deliver back. And that's an example of even like living in a city like Hong Kong, getting material from one side of town to the other, which is only like 30, 50 miles, is a short distance, but the transport costs are still high to the value of the materials that can be sold on the recycled market. So that's where we get into this thing about optimizing logistics and working out how you can do the reverse logistics, and looking at the types of vehicles that different companies are using for you. So encouraging lower emissions or right-sized vehicles, that transparency so you can see where products are coming from, how they're being made. I've often talked, or mainly talked here, about the environmental impacts, but you also the impacts on communities and those flow-on health and social impacts of poor management of energy is often translating. If we've got coal-powered stations that haven't got very good scrubbers, then you're getting air pollution issues and those flow-on community health issues. So it's kind of keeping all of these things together, saying, actually, this one would have a bigger impact in that area, and that's the area I want. It might be more on the health side rather than the actual greenhouse gas emission side that you're focusing on. And the great news, I suppose, as we bring all that together, with renewable energy, resource efficiency, circular economy principles, there are some amazing solutions out there. And with most things, often those solutions are there and available. They just haven't been taken up at volume yet, and there's some kind of limitation on that. So don't think that you as a small company making a small change isn't going to help, because that can just show that it works. You can become more of a pilot project for larger companies or other industries to follow. So to steps to address your supply chain emissions is broken down into this areas. So you identify your hotspots, and that can be through carbon accounting or risk assessments, whatever you see as your hotspot challenges, and then prioritize those emissions hotspots for the impact you can have on them. As I was saying, there's not many producers of some materials, and so it mightn't be easy to change those if you're a small player and there's only a couple of suppliers. So look at the next one. It mightn't be your highest one. Look at the next couple and see whether you have a bigger chance to impact to them by reaching out to those suppliers, and show your influence by also saying, hey, these other companies are looking at this, or we've got this group together that are prepared to buy X tons or X liters of a material. We're ready to work with you. And you can't just say to a supplier often, change. They've got to see the need, the reason for the change. They also have to see the financial viability to them. And so often you can end up in your supply chain discussions looking at ways to say, hey, I've already got this knowledge or this technology that I can help fund you to fund and put in and support, or there's this grant that we can get. So make sure you're working with your supplier for helping them make the change, because some may be willing to, but they just haven't yet seen the ways to get that capital or process into their business. And of course, there's this whole range of different publications that you can see, and moving on about, well, how do we finance the whole issue of this change? And this is where companies, and we're back at the clothing, for those that don't know the PVH Corp, Phillips Van Heusen Corporation. It's a clothing company which has brands like Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein. So these bigger brands, when they start working on how do we actually finance that and work together, and then coming up with emissions cuts, success stories. So this one's where we're seeing companies that are able to set a strong target, put the message out there, and then achieve it early, gives I suppose a lot of positive vibe at the moment in an area that can seem like things can be rolling backwards rather than going forwards, or at least gone very static in the whole sustainability, greenhouse gas emission side of things. So look for the positive examples where, if you're in companies and trying to make this change already, and keep track of them so that you've got those success stories, because you'll often run into people in conversations saying, yeah, but so-and-so's company's just pulled out of doing their emissions reductions at the moment. In the last year or two, there's a lot of that step back, partly because the wonderful goals or high ambitions that were set were then translated into targets that were expected to be met by businesses, and they didn't separate what their real vision or end goal was trying to be. When they set their targets, they left them the same, so the expectation was they were going to get there. So at that stage, with what do we got, about 5 to 10 minutes, if there's any other questions, the Shark, if you're there, just clarify to me if we can, but I understand that there's a course going to be released reasonably soon from TeraDo that'll allow you to do the online training at your own space, and we'd probably be having, and I think that's over a 4-week they're looking at, and we'd have some open house sessions during that time for you to read the materials, look at the exercises, and then come along like TeraDo do to the open house to ask any questions. Have we had any updates yet on when that's being launched? No, it's in the getting things prepared, folks, at the moment, and ready to launch. So feel free to either type a question or unmute yourself and ask questions around supply chain and or anything else in the sustainability space that you think is appropriate to this discussion to do with coursework with TeraDo. Any burning questions? And I'm just quickly looking back at the chat. So we covered off. Oh, thanks for the other examples, people of that different areas where impacts along the supply chain happen and what different percentages are. Often with me, I also find that there's so many different statistics out there. You're wondering what baseline everyone's using. So for a lot of this, I consider the oh, does that feel about right for being 80% right for a field, or does that feel there's something wrong here for numbers? If you don't have any questions, that's no
Hi,
problem. Hi, Vanita. Yeah.
I just wanted to know if you know of any success stories in the fast fashion space. I have been doing a side project in the fashion industry on the greenhouse gases emissions, so would like to know something about it.
Well, which component? If we go back to those 4 stages, I think the fast fashion ones that comes in now, that's not an area I remember about, but there's a sustainable cotton collective or some words like that. Feel free, someone else that knows this, to type it in there. But basically, they're looking at ways of producing cotton with less water use, and the organic cotton, because of all the pesticides that are required for growing cotton as well. So even just at the production side, right at the raw material production, you've got the ability to change your supply by just requesting more environmentally friendly cotton production. What else springs to mind? On the fashion side of things, textiles, the other one is the interesting one when you look at Patagonia's what do they call it? It's like don't buy new, repair, and they're now doing repair. So it's how the warranties on some companies are moving to kind of slow down the fast fashion part and just say we're making good products. That 2 things that springs to mind. But if others have good examples, feel free to share them in the meeting chat so that there's other examples for Nita.
Thank you.
What's going on in the question space in the meeting chat there, Shark?
There's one on which area is the hardest or easiest, do you think, in terms of improving sustainability?
Improving sustainability. The hardest in the current climate is getting more people thinking about it, I would say. I mean, every one of you in this meeting is obviously interested in this and have already made that little aha moment. So I think that the easiest one is realizing just some of the simple things and getting people to share that so others get involved. I was doing some training the other day with a corporate that they're just going through their revising their policy on climate impact, and a simple thing, we had a deep dive into what is the local recycling processes. And one of the things that we used to do here in New Zealand was crush cans, because you wanted to crush the aluminium drinking can, I'm thinking of, to put them in a bag, so you got more of them in a bag to take to the recycler. Well, actually, a lot of the separation that's done by machines now at waste recovery facilities actually want the containers still the full shape, because the way they've designed them to bounce down the conveyor belts and be scanned, flat plastic bottles and flat aluminium cans can't be picked out as easily by the machines as full round ones. So just leaving things unsquashed and understanding that was an interesting one. So you think, well, I wonder how many houses are going to do that at home. It's not just at the company office site where we did that. You got any suggestions on that hardest to easiest there, Shark, yourself? Because Shark's involved with doing life cycle analysis on products and things like that. So what springs to your mind?
Just for the specific and supply chain, I was thinking of easiest areas are probably anything within control. So like scope 1 and 2 emissions, like things like we've mentioned earlier, like switching to renewable energy, any energy efficiency upgrades. And clearly for me, the hardest areas to improve are always within the scope 3 emissions realm. So thinking about like your upstream supply chain, thinking about the downstream, so in the disposal realm. So yeah, scope 3 is always the hardest challenge, but it's also the biggest opportunity for, meaningful change in your supply chain emissions. But I think there are a few more questions here, Marin, if
Yeah,
you'd
just
want to
looking
go.
at the audit reportings ones. Look up the things like CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, as it was before. If we're talking supply chain, that reports from
Mm-hmm.
companies like that. That's the first one that springs to mind. There's a whole alphabetic soup of different one when you're looking at impacts and that you got. I'm just trying to remember what the new acronym is for the. Um, uh, um, it's gone from me totally. Um, which there's a reporting standards group that has industry specific guidelines on what are the key areas for each industry, and they're a great place to kind of look at this for the main things looking at. But pretty much most listed companies now will have a component of their sustainability, of their annual report will have sustainability reporting in there. And when you say audit reportings, in there you can often find what they've based things on, and there'll be other documents online. For an energy company that is yet to transition to renewables, how would you say navigating this process is achievable for the supply chain team? Partner up with lots of people in your region and lobby hard would be probably that, because if you're talking one of the big energy companies and if you're on a big mixed grid, it's a bit hard to work on that. Though some countries, some states have the ability for you to choose your power supplier, and they do some creative accounting to say where that renewable green energy is coming from and keeping track of it. So it might be in your state, it might be in a different area. So just asking their company, I know their company mightn't yet have as much renewable energy as you want to buy or your group want to buy, but finding if they have an ability to work with another company and do that credits and making sure that power produced somewhere else that's not connected to your grid you can actually use. Now, don't ask me how they do that, because that to me all sounds a little bit of smoke and mirrors, but they do that here in New Zealand with some of the country grid being all connected in one, and I'm sure that must be happening in other parts of the world. But even a company that has some wind turbines and still major, say, coal, as long as you can buy that 20% power that they're producing, that should give them the comfort to kind of look at expanding that if they've already sold all of what they can sell. Any other questions there?
There was just this one last in the Q&A tab. It says, do you have examples of business coalitions working together to approach suppliers to adopt sustainable practices? You should take a look at we mentioned Walmart's project Gigaton. So they collaborate with its global suppliers, and the idea is that collectively they want to avoid a billion metric tons of GHGs by 2030, and they provide suppliers with like tools, best practices, incentives, awards to reduce emissions in energy, waste, packaging, and product use, I believe.
Yeah, and then in the other kind of thing is keep an eye out for. I know they're changing direction a little bit, but the Ellen MacArthur Foundation was a great one from that whole plastics,
Mm-hmm.
where
Yeah.
people were reporting plastics. If you think you know a company that's doing stuff quite well, go and look at what they're doing who they're partnering with. Just do some quick searches online. They'll normally say on their website, have releases saying, hey, we're part of this. And so say go back to reading what is Patagonia part of, where's their name, and other companies that have been in it for a long time, that have done great stuff and continue to do. One of those is Interface. So look at the flooring carpet company Interface and what they're doing, because they also have some pretty cool ideas around businesses thinking as a forest and how you partner in that. And there's other companies involved with them. I'm going to say, is it Nike or Adidas, that they're locating factories next to each other to try and use the waste heat and waste energy from one to work with the other. All right, we've managed to go past the top of the hour. If we've covered off questions, that's great. Looks as though we have. Thank you all for participating today, sharing your questions, and good luck on your sustainability journey, and I hope to see you in one or other courses in the future.
Thank you.
Stop recording there, Jacques, when you got a second.